Here's the hidden truth Sopranos fans never want to admit. Tony Soprano, the man who ruled New Jersey with explosive tantrums and cheap intimidation, had absolutely zero power over Furio Junta. None. And the show makes that painfully, almost embarrassingly clear. Think about it. The moment Carmela confessed her feelings, Tony puffed up his chest and muttered that certain people in Naples would be looking for Furio. Sounds terrifying. Until you ask the one question Tony hopes nobody asks. Which people? Who exactly was he going to call? Annalisa? The boss who happens to be Furio's cousin, who already treated Tony like a mildly profitable embarrassment every time he opened his mouth? This is where the mythology collapses. Tony wasn't feared in Italy. He was tolerated. Barely. The Neapolitans saw right through him. The bluster, the insecurity, the pretend authority. They respected Furio. They humored Tony. So when Tony threatened Furio's life, it wasn't a power move. It was damage control, a bluff. A man terrified of losing face in his own kitchen. And deep down, he knew it. Carmela knew it. And if you rewatch the show carefully, you'll see the writers knew it too. Tony Soprano's supposed manhunt for Furio Junta stands as one of the more absurd, self-mythologizing moments in a series overflowing with masculine pageantry, delusion, and the theater of power. The threat, if certain people find him, he's a dead man, is delivered with all the gravitas of a man who desperately wishes he were Don Corleone, but is, in practice, a glorified crew boss presiding over a dysfunctional suburban crime ring held together by cheap suits, shaky egos, and whatever remains of the gabagool budget. The very idea that this deeply insecure New Jersey boss could pick up a phone, dial Naples, and order a hit on one of Annalisa's best men, who also happens to be her cousin, is a fantasy so extravagant it practically deserves an opera score of its own. And yet, the threat conveniently has one purpose: to wound Carmela. Tony's bravado exists in the space between her confession of infatuation and his need to reestablish dominance. The man who cannot control his own impulses, household, or blood pressure suddenly imagines himself as an international power broker capable of summoning shadowy assassins from the old world. It is not merely an idle bluff. It is a performance crafted for a singular audience, his wife, whose affection has slipped into the gravitational pull of a man who embodies everything Tony pretends to be: disciplined, efficient, dangerous without being reckless, and capable without needing to compensate for it every waking moment. One must pause to savor the logistics of Tony's supposed call. Who exactly was he going to ring in Naples? Annalisa, the boss who already treated him as a transactional inconvenience, an occasional object of amusement? The woman who, speaking more English than anyone else in her kingdom, would be forced to listen as this American satellite, already regarded by the Neapolitans as a mildly profitable embarrassment, attempted to explain that his wife had developed a crush? The same Annalisa who called Furio one of my best men, a loyal soldier whose value clearly exceeded that of a visiting suburban don, who spent much of his Italian trip insulting her hospitality and resisting her flirtations? The image of Tony stammering through a justification for the assassination of a man with whom he has no legitimate beef is almost too perfectly humiliating to accept as canon. It requires no deep analysis to grasp how preposterous it would be. Even if Tony had been willing to humiliate himself, the Neapolitans would have dismissed him with the same casual disdain they applied to the Americans during their brief cultural exchange. The old world's contempt for the new world ran so thick, it practically curtained the screen. The glances, the muttered observations about American softness, the effortless way even low-level street kids demonstrated more menace than half of Tony's capos. Naples barely respected New York, and New York barely respected New Jersey. The notion that Annalisa would jeopardize her own bloodline on behalf of a man from a lower status American satellite family over a domestic embarrassment no Italian boss could ever publicly admit collapses under its own impossibility. The reasons Tony would never make that call are legion. First, the request itself would reveal the most unspeakable truth a patriarch in that world could confess. He had been emotionally cuckolded, and not even physically, just emotionally, which is all the more pathetic in a culture that prizes dominance above all else. If Tony had ever admitted that his wife was pining after one of his soldiers, his stock would have collapsed faster than a rigged union fund. The old world holds honor as currency. Tony would have been bankrupt instantly. Third, Tony lacked any legitimate grounds for the hit. Furio had not betrayed him, stolen from him, violated the code, or even acted on the affection Carmela projected onto him. The helicopter moment, Tony's folkloric brush with the blades, demonstrated Furio's self-control. He spared his boss rather than remove the problem at its root. The idea that this near accident constituted a capital offense stretches credulity. A soldier who levies a blow against his boss dies. A soldier who pauses before doing so becomes the source of a secret shame the boss pretends never happened. If anything, Furio's restraint protected Tony from becoming a messy cautionary tale about what happens when a weak leader presides over stronger men. Fourth, Tony never possessed that level of influence in Italy. His occasional ability to hire Italian hitmen for domestic jobs, Rusty for example, depended on a transactional relationship, not a deep alliance. These connections remained open precisely because Tony never demanded something as outlandish as the killing of a top soldier for personal reasons. Had he tried, the pipeline would have dried up instantly. The same cousins who eliminated Rusty would have vanished from his Rolodex forever, if not returned to New Jersey to deliver a message he would not survive to misinterpret. The balance of power was unmistakably in Italy's favor. Tony could import temporary muscle, but he could not export his insecurities. It is equally telling that Carmela, upon hearing Tony's threat, displays no reaction resembling fear for Furio's life. Whether because she recognizes Tony's bluffing nature, because she already knows how limited his influence is overseas, or because her emotional turmoil has burned past the point where logic or consequences matter, her indifference functions like a silent indictment of Tony's posturing. The marriage, already rotten, reveals its rot in this moment. Her confession wounds him deeply, but not deeply enough to provoke action, only words. In exchange, he tosses back a threat so hollow, even the intended target fails to pretend to care. This alleged indifference has fueled accusations that Carmela is unusually cold, even sociopathic. Yet her emotional posture, while morally ambiguous, is neither unprecedented nor mysterious. She has lived for years in a marriage structured around mutual delusion. Tony's delusion that he is a respected leader and family man, and her delusion that emotional fulfillment can be achieved within an arrangement built on lies, infidelity, and violence. Her attachment to Furio, and her devastation when he flees, speaks not to sociopathy, but to the increasingly desperate attempts of a woman seeking passion in a life curated around material comfort and moral compromise. Of course she adapts quickly. Adaptation is her primary survival mechanism. She learned long ago that pleading for mercy or expressing deep concern for others only amplifies Tony's worst tendencies. Her silence is not apathy, it is calculation. As for Furio, his departure from New Jersey exposes the vast chasm between American and Italian criminal hierarchies. To Tony's crew, he was an exotic import, disciplined, stylish, terrifying when necessary, and possessed of a moral center so alien to the Jersey ethos it appeared suspicious. To the Italians, Furio was a trusted soldier, fully capable of rising to greater ranks. His stint in New Jersey was a temporary assignment, almost a study abroad program in American dysfunction. His return home, greeted warmly by Annalisa, was less an escape and more a restoration of natural order. Whether he returned to serve as capo or simply resumed his old role, he re-entered a system where he was respected, not merely tolerated, by a man who viewed him with both envy and fear. The idea that Furio's crush on Carmela compromises his authenticity as an old-world enforcer has been dismissed on grounds both practical and thematic. Even the most hardened men in the series possess emotional lives that complicate their roles. Tony cries over ducks, panics in therapy, and spirals into depression. Christopher oscillates between ruthless ambition and fragile insecurity. Paulie, for all his bluster, is consumed by superstitions and existential dread. Why should Furio be exempt from complexity? His attraction to Carmela does not weaken him, it humanizes him in a universe where emotional repression only makes the inevitable explosions more catastrophic. Unlike Tony, he recognizes that acting on forbidden desire is not an option. So he removes himself, honoring the old code by refusing to break it, even if it means abandoning a life he enjoyed and a woman he cherished. One could imagine a more romanticized version of events. Perhaps Carmela glimpsing him in Paris, tucked in the background of a cafe scene, wearing a beret and sipping espresso. But the show wisely avoids such indulgence. The story is not about star-crossed lovers. It is about the delusions that drive people to ruin. Carmela imagines Furio as the antidote to her guilt. Furio imagines America as a temporary detour. Both are wrong. The saga ends not with triumph, but with absence, which in The Sopranos is often the closest the characters come to grace. Tony's relationship with Furio remains one of the few dynamics he could never fully dominate. He could bully Christopher, manipulate Paulie, humiliate Bobby, and psychologically corral nearly every man in his orbit. But Furio was unmoved by his tantrums, unafraid of his temper, and unimpressed by his authority. The helicopter moment, Furio leaning close, Tony wobbling at the edge of the blades, summarizes their entire relationship. One man is capable of violence but controlled, the other is terrified yet desperate to pretend he isn't. That Tony survived the encounter is not evidence of his power, but of Furio's discipline. The contrast becomes clearer when examining Tony's limited global influence. His family's operations never approached the grandeur he imagined. Modern law enforcement, RICO statutes, DNA evidence, and constant surveillance reduced the aura of invincibility once enjoyed by old-world dons. Tony's empire is modest, lucrative only by the modest standards of suburban New Jersey, and riddled with incompetence from top to bottom. He is respected only when the alternatives are Paulie, Christopher, Patsy, and a string of desperate hangers-on who regard Tony as leader, not because of his brilliance, but because he is the least pathetic of available options. His empire is not expanding but decaying, propped up long enough for him to siphon whatever profits remain. This context colors every aspect of the alleged Furio threat. The Italians viewed Tony's crew as a sideshow. Paulie's gracelessness, Christopher's drug problems, and Tony's impulsive rudeness marked them as cultural amateurs. Even the prostitutes demonstrated disgust. The Neapolitan street gangs showcased a ruthless efficiency that made the Jersey boys look like community theater performers attempting Shakespeare. Tony, aware of this hierarchy on some level, bluffed the Furio threat not because he believed it, but because he needed Carmela to believe it. Yet even Carmela, who has historically responded to Tony's bluster with a mixture of fear and capitulation, finds this particular performance unworthy of alarm. She neither challenges his claim nor dignifies it with panic. She simply allows it to dissipate. Her silence punctures Tony's fantasy more effectively than any argument. A woman in genuine fear for Furio's life might plead or panic. Carmela does neither. Her lack of response exposes Tony's powerlessness more completely than any counter-argument. Some argue that her indifference reveals a deeper moral rot. But if Carmela truly believed Tony capable of killing Furio, one could argue that declaring her feelings to Tony was the ultimate betrayal. Instead, her confession reveals something more complex. She is not a sociopath, she is exhausted. Exhausted by Tony's cheating, exhausted by her role as decorative partner, exhausted by the endless cycle of emotional manipulation disguised as family unity. Her choices may be morally questionable, but they are also consistently shaped by the survival instincts of a woman living inside a gilded cage. The series repeatedly emphasizes that Carmela's yearning for morally unacceptable men, priests, guidance counselors, handymen, and finally Furio, is less a reflection of predatory desire than of emotional starvation. She wants love, or at least the fantasy of it. Furio, with his quiet competence and respectful demeanor, becomes a vessel for this fantasy. Her devastation upon his departure, crying alone in her home, staring at the void he left, contradicts the notion that she didn't care whether he lived or died. She cared deeply. She simply understood, perhaps better than Tony ever could, that nothing in her world could be done about it. Speculating about Carmela's imagined post-series pilgrimage to seek out Furio in Italy is an amusing diversion, though nothing in the canon supports it. Carmela's first and only priority after Tony's disappearance or death would be securing financial stability, not rekindling an impossible romance. The idea that she would track down Furio with AJ in tow, or reconnect with Wegler, or revisit the Wallpaper Man, is the stuff of fan fiction, not legitimate narrative analysis. She has always been pragmatic. She would choose inheritance over infatuation every time. The larger truth is that Furio is one of the few characters Tony could never truly touch. The rest of Tony's circle remains bound to him by fear, dependence, shared secrets, or sheer inertia. Artie is the only civilian who occasionally stands up to Tony, but he does so behind the protective wall of childhood history. Every other soldier fears Tony's wrath, or at least fears the instability that follows it. Furio alone possessed both the temperament and the resources to leave permanently. He had somewhere to go, a life awaiting him, and people who respected him. Tony, sensing this autonomy, could never fully dominate him. It is no accident that Tony's threats against Furio sound more like wish fulfillment than actual commands. The notion that Italian hitmen would risk their own lives by murdering a valued soldier for the sake of an American boss they barely tolerate collapses under even the lightest scrutiny. Had Tony dared to make such a request, the Italians might well have reversed the threat. Tony's Italian privileges, already precarious, would have evaporated instantly. He would have become the target rather than the customer. The cultural and organizational gap between Naples and Newark is too vast to bridge with a single phone call. Ultimately, Tony's imaginary manhunt for Furio reveals more about Tony than about Furio. It exposes the fragility beneath the performance, the insecurity beneath the rage, and the limits of the power he so desperately clings to. It also exposes how thoroughly Carmela has learned to navigate his theatrics. She listens, withholds reaction, and allows the bluff to drift away like cigarette smoke. No one believes Tony made the call. Not Carmela, not the audience, not even Tony. The threat exists only as a theatrical flourish in a marriage built on theatrics. In the end, Furio returns to Italy, respected and restored. Carmela remains trapped in the gilded prison she chose. Tony continues performing the role of a powerful boss, even as the world around him sees through the costume. And the line, "If certain people find him, he's a dead man," lingers as one of the most revealing jokes in the entire series. A threat no one believes, issued by a man who cannot accept that the one person he could not intimidate was the only man his wife ever truly fell for. Honor the analysis Tony could never make. Subscribe.